I was born on March 12, 1945, in a modest stone house overlooking the Tagus River in Lisbon. My name is Gabriel Santos, and I followed my calling into the priesthood at the age of 20, entering the seminary with nothing more than a worn Bible, a prayer book pressed to my chest, and an unshakable conviction that God's mercy could transform even the darkest of hearts. For more than 50 years, I led masses in vaulted cathedrals and humble chapels, tended to the poor in narrow alleyways, and offered confession and counsel to anyone who sought it. My hair grayed as the decades passed, my hands, once steady, grew lined with age. Yet I felt no greater purpose than to be a vessel for divine compassion. On the morning of May 12, 2025, I awoke before dawn, as I always did, and donned my cassock to pray in the candlelit sanctuary. The scent of incense still clung to the air from last night's vigil. I remembered the faint hum of church bells drifting across the cobblestones, summoning souls to worship. I laid a hand on the altar rail, closed my eyes, and inhaled deeply. Moments later, a crushing weight seized my chest. Pain radiated through my ribs like ice, and the world around me fractured into shards of light and shadow. I stumbled backward, collapsing against the ancient stone floor, and felt my pulse slip away. In that instant, time elongated. The silence in my mind echoed louder than any. I awoke to a suffocating hush broken only by the distant echo of my own ragged breath. The moment I opened my eyes, I realized I was no longer within the familiar stone walls of the chapel. Instead, I lay sprawled on a cold obsidian floor that shimmered like fractured glass beneath a blood-red sky. I staggered to my feet, mind reeling, and found myself in a vast hall whose ceiling arched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness. Jagged pillars of charred rock lined the corridor, each one crowned with tongues of ember that hissed as they licked unseen air. As I took my first tentative steps, the heat pressed against my skin like the breath of a living furnace. The air tasted of ash and brimstone, and every inhalation scorched the back of my throat. Hands groped at my cassock, rough, grasping fingers that slipped away into the shadows before I could grasp their owners. My heart pounded, though I had long since ceased to feel the rhythm of a beating pulse. Each footfall sent tremors through the ground, causing ripples of light to dance across pools of liquid fire that bubbled along the edges of the floor. I looked down one corridor and saw a great iron door, its surface etched with writhing figures locked in eternal torment. Beyond it lay a deeper darkness, beckoning. To my left, archways opened onto cavernous chambers where corrosive steam coiled like serpents and distant wails wove into a mournful chorus. It was as if every cry of anguish in human history had been gathered here, amplified, and set free to echo forever. Driven by some compulsion I could neither name nor resist, I moved toward the central chamber. Massive stone arches framed the entrance, each carved with grotesque visages, eyes hollow, mouths agape in silent screams. As I crossed the threshold, the pillars gave way to open space, and I found myself on a rocky plateau, suspended over a churning sea of molten rock. The crimson sky above crackled with lightning that revealed, momentarily, the silhouette of a colossal bridge arching across the abyss. A low rumble shook the ground beneath me. I felt drawn to the far end of the bridge, where a solitary figure stood bathed in a flickering glow. Even from this distance, I recognized the outline of a man bent beneath a burden that seemed too vast to bear. My breath caught in my throat. Who was this tortured soul? The air around me vibrated with silent accusation, as though this figure's despair was entwined with my own. In that moment, I understood that this place was not merely a prison for the damned, but a mirror reflecting every falter of faith, every unatoned sin. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I was only beginning to learn the true weight of my own. Thunderstorm. I sensed a pull, a silent summons, drawing me away from the familiar walls of the chapel and into a vast, yawning abyss. My last conscious thought was a whispered prayer: "Lord, have mercy on my soul." Then, as breath left me, everything went dark. That darkness was not emptiness, but a corridor where every memory, every regret, and every unanswered question seemed to swirl together. I did not know then how long I would linger there, nor did I realize that the journey I was about to undertake would shatter every certainty I had ever held. Yet even in that silent void, a faint glimmer of purpose remained, as if the hand of grace still reached for me, urging me onward into the unknown. I didn't see it coming until the ground beneath me gave way. One moment I stood at the edge of that molten sea, heart pounding with dread. The next, I was plummeting through a rift of jagged stone and blistering air. The wind screamed past my ears, carrying distant cries that felt like the howls of 1,000 broken souls. My cassock whipped around me as I fell, and for an endless instant I thought I would shatter against the rocks below. Instead, I landed on a bed of smoldering coals that seared through my robes and burned my flesh, yet somehow I felt no pain, only a profound, hollow shock. As I struggled to rise, painful memories flickered through my mind. The times I judged too harshly, the prayers I offered half-heartedly, the comfort I withheld from those in need. Each regret became a physical weight, an invisible chain that pulled me deeper into the abyss. I staggered forward, chest tight, as figures emerged from the shadows, men and women I had known in life, twisted into grotesque mockeries of themselves. There was Father André, once my closest friend in the seminary, now suspended by iron hooks from the cavern's ceiling, his face frozen in an eternal plea for forgiveness I had never granted. I reached out, but my hand passed through him like smoke. Beyond him, a ring of onlookers circled a central pit, their dead eyes trained on the spectacle within. I swallowed hard as I recognized my own mother among them, her gentle features contorted by an unseen force. She was bound to a spiked wheel that turned slowly, each rotation drawing fresh blood, each drop a testament to my failure to forgive her human faults when she was alive. "Father Gabriel," she whispered, voice thin as cobweb, "you closed your heart when I needed mercy." A sickening churn rose in my stomach. I wanted to flee, but the molten earth beneath my boots sizzled with each step, forcing me onward. Suddenly, tendrils of black smoke curled around my ankles, tightening like coils of rope. I tried to wrench free, but they pulled me toward the edge of a widening crevasse where hundreds of souls teetered, tumbling into darkness below. Their faces were blurred, their screams so high-pitched that my mind threatened to crack. I covered my ears, but the cacophony only grew louder, as if the very air conspired to crush me. Then I saw her, Maria, the orphan girl I once comforted during confessions, now crawling through the ashen dust with hollow eyes. She dragged herself toward me, her outstretched hand stained with grime. "You promised to protect me," she rasped. "Why did you leave me to suffer?" Her words cut deeper than any blade. My knees buckled, and the chains binding my spirit tightened until I gasped for release. I felt my faith unraveling, thread by thread, as the realization dawned that every soul here mirrored a sliver of my own shortcomings. A jagged thought pierced the madness. Perhaps this was not punishment but revelation. Each horror, each anguished cry, was a mirror reflecting the neglect and judgment I had carried in life. And as I sank to my knees on the burning ground, tears of ash and remorse streamed down my face. In that crucible of despair, I tasted true contrition, an understanding that redemption required more than rituals and sermons. It demanded the unguarded vulnerability of a broken heart. Only then, as I closed my eyes against the flames and whispers of the damned, did I sense the faint stir of hope beneath the agony, beckoning me toward whatever lay beyond this pit of suffering. I crawled forward through the choking haze, each breath a struggle against the volcanic fury that seeped into my lungs. Before me rose an amphitheatre carved from black basalt, its walls alive with writhed faces etched into the stone, an audience of the damned. They sat in concentric tiers, their eyes like dying embers, fixed upon the pit at the centre, where I now stood quaking. The molten sea had receded here, replaced by jagged obsidian shards that jutted upward like teeth. In their midst lay a scaffold, a wooden frame bound by iron rings, dripping with dark ichor. My body trembled as figures forced me toward it. Their whispering voices twisted my name into a litany of accusation. Santos! 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 I felt the coarse iron collar clamp around my neck, the weight of it anchoring me to this place of judgment. Panic flared in my chest. "No, Lord!" I gasped, but no mercy came. Instead, a chorus of hollow laughter rose from the tears, echoing in endless circles. Chains rattled as they secured my wrists to the posts. The wood beneath me was slick with sweat and blood, whose blood I could not tell. I tried to steel my spirit with prayer, but the words froze on my lips. A harsh wind whipped sparks into my face, and in that moment, I realized I was utterly exposed, stripped of every sanctimony, every veneer of righteousness I had worn in life. Then they brought them forth. First, the bishop I had defied when he embezzled tithes, his belly distended, eyeballs rolling in agony as he writhed beside me. I remembered kneeling before him in council, blind to his sin. He lifted a trembling hand, blooded and broken, and spat. Your silence was my license. My throat constricted. I had defended his authority, believing in the church's sanctity, never questioning the corruption I whispered about only behind closed doors. Next, they dragged my former mentor, Father Lucio, now a skeletal wraith whose thin fingers clawed at the air. He had once taught me compassion, but I abandoned him when scandal tainted his name, refused to speak his truth. He fixed me with hollow eyes and moaned, "I prayed for you last, Gabriel." The words hollowed out my chest like a blade. A voice, a child's voice, pierced the tumult. I looked down to see little Sophia, the beggar girl I'd known as an orphan in the church courtyard. Her hair was matted with soot, her face gaunt, and she held aloft a withered flower I had pressed into her hand years ago. That day, I had promised her God's blessing and safe haven. Now she approached, eyes rimmed with tears of ash. "You gave me hope, Father," she whispered, voice trembling. "Then you abandoned me." She cast the flower into the pit, its petals turned to ember midair. My heart cracked. From the shadows came one more figure, my own reflection, but aged far beyond my 80 years. His eyes were empty hollows, his face lined with every regret I had ever buried. He stepped forward and spoke in my voice. "All your deeds, your prayers, your sermons, what worth have they if your heart remained closed?" My knees buckled beneath me. I felt the collar tighten, each breath invoking a fresh wave of despair. The amphitheatre fell silent as the molten ground beneath me vibrated. I sensed the crowd lean in, awaiting my confession, my final surrender. But my tongue faltered. I had no eloquence left, only raw remorse. And so I whispered, voice hoarse as gravel, I was proud. I was blind. I failed to love as I preached. Each word splintered the iron around my neck. A tremor coursed through the pit, and a shaft of pale light pierced the darkness above. The crowd recoiled, hissing like startled serpents. The figures around me faltered in their torment. I felt the chains loosen their grip, the collar grow less constricting. And in that trembling silence, I realized that hope, and the grace to confess, had not vanished entirely. Even here, at the bleakest edge of despair, a single act of genuine contrition could crack the foundations of hell itself. I felt the ground shudder beneath me, the cavern's oppressive heat paling against a sudden coolness that swept through the amphitheatre like a whispered promise. Above the jagged obsidian pillars, a column of pure, blinding light descended, parting the crimson haze in a silent crescendo. For the first time since my fall, I heard a voice, neither thunderous nor distant, but clear as a bell in my very soul. "Gabriel," it called, and I knew before I saw him that it was the Christ. When I dared to raise my eyes, there he stood upon the molten sea's edge, robes white as morning mist and feet unburned by the fiery tide. His arms were outstretched, wounds in his hands glowing with gentle radiance rather than agony. Every accent of his presence dissolved fear. The very air seemed to breathe with mercy. He took a step toward me, and the crowd of wailing shadows recoiled, as though their chains and collars no longer bound them. "Time is running out," he said, voice like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "The world above teeters on the brink of its own undoing. The hourglass drains with every heartbeat." His gaze found mine, and I felt the weight of those words press into my chest, an urgent summons beyond any ritual or sermon I had ever delivered. He knelt beside me, placing a hand over the blooded collar at my throat. Flames that had burned through flesh curled away, and the iron shattered like brittle glass. "Rise, my servant," he commanded. "Carry this warning back to the living." In that moment, I understood that redemption was not only personal forgiveness, but a mission to ignite hope in a world fading into darkness. As his light enveloped me completely, I bowed my head, ready to reclaim my purpose. When my eyes fluttered open, the world was achingly familiar and yet forever changed. I lay in a sterile hospital room, white walls glowing under harsh lights. Tubes fed into my arm, monitors beeped a steady rhythm, and a nurse's gentle touch grounded me in flesh and bone. My heart still ached where the collar had pressed, and each breath reminded me of fire and ash. Memories of that abyss coursed through my mind like tidal waves, screams of the condemned, molten rivers, the faces of those I had failed. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, half expecting my ribs to burn. Instead, I felt only the rapid thud of life returning. A battle raged within me. The priest I had been, confident in doctrine and duty, stood at odds with this new Gabriel, scarred by vision and urgency. Thoughts tumbled in my mind. Had I ever truly understood mercy? My sermons now rang hollow against the roar of that divine light. I closed my eyes and prayed, not for healing, but for guidance. In the stillness I sensed his voice again, faint but clear. "Awaken fully, servant. Your journey has only just begun." Awakening from that vision, I could no longer settle into routine prayer and rote ritual. Each morning, I rose before dawn, not to prepare the Mass, but to walk Lisbon's silent streets, seeking faces that bore hidden burdens. I listened as the homeless man spoke of dreams haunted by fire, as a grieving widow confessed nightmares of endless corridors. Their words mirrored my own journey through darkness, and I realized my calling had shifted from pulpit to pilgrimage. I began questioning every ceremony I once held sacred. Were my blessings mere words if they failed to kindle true hope? Late at night, I pored over ancient texts and sat by the Tagus, letting the river's steady flow remind me that grace moves beyond stone walls. My prayers became less formal. They erupted from a heart humbled by what I had witnessed. In those quiet hours, I sensed a new purpose emerging: to guide others not toward doctrine alone, but into an encounter with mercy so profound it could transform despair into action. This was no longer a path of passive faith, but a journey of relentless compassion, and I embraced it with trembling faith and unwavering resolve. Since that day, my life has transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. I resigned my official duties at the church and founded a small community center by the river, where those broken by circumstance find shelter, a warm meal, and a listening ear. Each sunrise, I lead a silent meditation on the stone quay, guiding souls to confront their own fears and embrace hope. My sermons have become conversations, raw, honest dialogues about mercy and responsibility, punctuated by shared silence and tears rather than rote recitation of Scripture. I carry with me the memory of heat and despair, but also the radiance of that divine light. It fuels every act of kindness, the outstretched hand to a stranger, the prayer whispered over a child's fevered brow, the late-night vigil for a soul teetering on the brink. I no longer measure faith by attendance or obligation, but by the courage to act with compassion when the world's flame seems all but extinguished. As I walk these streets, I feel the weight of my calling settle over me like a mantle of hope. The past cannot be undone, but it can be redeemed through love. And so, I step forward each day, resolved to share the message I carry. Time is running out, but mercy endures, and even the darkest night must yield to dawn.